Tonight we will be speaking to a gentleman who got in touch with me recently. I've been doing a lot of expose on genocide in colonial parts of the world. Many of you may remember we've had Kevin Annett staying with us and doing some work with us here at Freedom Central. So, alongside my own book, which looks at various aspects of what went on in South Africa, I was recently contacted by someone who can provide the New Zealand perspective on this. And so it's wonderful to have this all coming together. And of course, in a few weeks, we will also be having someone who was recommended to me by the fabulous Lisa Harrison coming and speaking to us on our show with regards to the Australian perspective of colonisation, the globalization, and of course, genocide and detribalization of the natives. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight over to my guest, Simon Kaiwai, whose personal story, like many of us on this journey, is just as interesting as the information he'll share with us tonight. And of course, this will reveal the real history of New Zealand and what really went on there as the colonial powers usurped that country and still pretty much control it to this very day. Hello, Simon.
Hi, Mel.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good.
Fantastic. You're in Bolivia now, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm sitting outside in what's called El Campo, which is in the countryside, so way out there.
Okay, I can hear all the birds around you. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, the birds and butterflies and small lot farmers all around. It's really quite nice.
Wonderful. Simon, before I called you up, I just introduced you a little bit and obviously I mentioned that you've got in touch with me after becoming familiar with some of the work that I've been up to, being South African, also being myself a former colonial, grew up there, and have experienced a lot of change, a lot of things going on. And my personal journey actually very much coincides with yours from what I've heard. And I think that's a good place to start. You've got an amazing plethora of knowledge with regards to New Zealand and the real history. But before we get into that, really I would love for you to share a little bit about your personal journey so people can get a bit of perspective as to where you're coming from.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm considered a mixed breed, or mongrel if you want to say. I recognise that I have European ancestry, Cook Island, New Zealand Māori history. And when I grew up, I was considered Māori by the immigrants, the Pākehās in New Zealand, but half caste by the Māori. So sort of in this no man's land, racially speaking, and that's really sort of helped form this position that I have, which is I can't really be racist because I recognise all these different parts of me. And we were raised in the Western system. So I'm degree qualified in business, and I sort of specialised in the technology field, and then went and worked as a business analyst in England for a couple of years. Set up a medical company in California for 5 years, and with a global business model, touching Asia and different things. And then I just kept on seeing these what you could call social issues popping up. And just moralistic issues like the Exxon Mobil scandal with a price fixing, and I built the forecasting system for some of the largest companies, or one of them over in the UK, and so I had familiarity with business decisions being made by the executive that were not in good faith to the business, and keeping the business going. They were just for their shareholder stock options. And I was becoming disenfranchised, and then what really woke me up was this issue in California, which coincided with my wife being pregnant with our first child, where they planned to spray the Bay Area residents, and particularly the Santa Cruz area, which is where we're living, with this known toxins, neurotoxins, at low level. Repeatedly, and in fact they did do it, and the sea turned red for about 3 weeks. Everyone came down with this, a couple of days later, this really bad flu that just had them laid up for 48 hours, but they didn't really connect it to the spray, but all the insects died, and it was just nasty. And then so we sort of got over that, but then 4 or 5 months later they announced that they wanted to do it again, and once a month for up to 10 years. So at the time I was the CEO of the medical company that we started, and I'd really focused my energy on asking, what's this about, what's in it, who's driving it, and I mapped out all of the companies and people touching this issue, and it went right up to the White House and right across global media. And then when you look at, and it wasn't about the money, it was more a social experiment, and it was undeniably evil. And so when I was facing that, when that became clear, I was like, well, what is going on here? This society, this is very different to what should be happening, and why aren't people taking more of an interest in it? And also, what can we do to prevent this? Because what became clear was this this conspiracy for a global total management system that some call the New World Order. And really, there's just deception upon deception upon deception at every level of it. It's a dog-eat-dog system. But it leads to and causes death and sickness. So it became clear for me that it was imperative to reprioritize what I was doing and actually start to look for, continue educating myself, attempt to educate others, and to really look for solutions, to try and encourage solutions to come to the fore. So we went back to New Zealand, and part of, there were hoping prophecies about the Māori from New Zealand being part of the solution, and there was about 4 or 5 years ago, there were other pieces of information that were showing that the Indigenous held some keys to this solution that we needed to really raise our consciousness towards and gravitate towards. So I went back and we lived out our campo out in the far countryside in New Zealand, in one of the most dense Māori populations. Beautiful part right at the top of the North Island. And I invested in networking with the different leaders and people and villages, people that were still living traditionally, and learning from them at the same time as learning about law. And that's where things started to become much more clear to me in terms of how things were working, because of the experiences that I started to get.
Okay, all right. Carry on.
Okay, yeah. Well, so some of those experiences were the people that I was walking with all had been studying the law, because the system is progressing through, even though it's largely illegitimate, it's progressing through consent, sort of contractual law, if you will, and most of that being through either people signing up for things that they're not fully informed about, or they're going for the short-term benefit, short-term money, and not seeing how it's robbing future generations or even their own security later on, or well-being later on, or through silence. They're cowered into silence through threats and economic deprivation and social pressures, all that kind of stuff. So all of the people I was running with were very conversant with law, the power of words, knowledgeable about LORE, the law of the land, knowledgeable about common law, and it became glaringly obvious that the police were not knowledgeable about the law, and in fact were some of the worst law breakers in New Zealand. So we all carried cameras around, video cameras around, and I had pen cameras. I tapped my own phone, and we just had cameras all over the place. You didn't go anywhere without cameras. And what I started to see was stuff that Bob Marley was singing about, the roadblock. They were still roadblocking Māori from accessing their own land. They were forcibly taking Māori off land and bulldozing their shelters and stuff, which you wouldn't think would be happening in this day and age, but it certainly is. And
so what year was this, Simon?
Well, this is just 3 years ago.
Yeah. It's incredible, hey? Sure.
It is. So as you unravel the layers of history and reveal the BS that's been taught, there's a maxim of law which says first in time, best in law. So what you do is you look back for the closest point of legitimacy, you know. So there's this New Zealand government in place, and you say, well, is it legitimate? So you have to work back in time and say, well, how did it get to be in the position that it was? And what they say is that it was there because of the Treaty of Waitangi, which was supposedly signed in 1840. And judges and politicians openly admit that the reason that they have this Crown New Zealand government in New Zealand with the ability to pass acts and legislation and have them enforced as law is because of the Treaty of Waitangi, particularly one or two words in there. And when you look at that, you say, well, hold on a second, the Treaty of Waitangi, that's an English translation of the Māori version, Te Treaty of Waitangi, which was supposedly signed in 1840, except that it's a mistranslation. It gives the Crown these rights it basically says that the Māori ceded sovereignty to the Crown through the translation, through the mistranslation, wherein when you look at the actual indigenous words, it doesn't say that at all. And this Treaty of Waitangi was actually judged as a nullity by one of their own Crown judges just before 1900. So it's a forgery and a fraud, and something that they never fulfilled their end on anyway. So what we find is that we've got this openly illegitimate entity, which was a private company, the New Zealand company, posing as a government for supposedly a free and democratic nation, and it's acting without a constitution or mandate, but running around like it owns everything, including the people. So I continued to dig further, and what we found was that in 1835, just 5 years before, the Māori tribes actually got together and signed and declared their independence through this document called He Whakaputanga, and it was recognised by King William IV. So to be a sovereign nation, you actually have to be recognised by another sovereign. That's international law, and it happened just 5 years earlier. And 3 years before that, we had just to give some context in terms of where the Māori were, they'd actually built two of their own trading ships in the late 1920s and early 1930s. They had their own trading ships, and they were doing very well internationally, so they were well travelled. They could see the impact of colonisation through the Dutch, through the French, the Spanish, the English. They were aware of what the Americans had done with their own Declaration of Independence, and they knew that they had to get recognised internationally or just get eaten up and oppressed. So they took the step of it took about a year of going around the country and all of the sovereign villages giving their input and approving the things that they came up with, and they actually came up with just 4 points, but they were so well thought out and comprehensive that it's a very good document. And the language that they used left it open. It's like a perpetual deed. It is considered a perpetual deed in law that anyone can accept. And by specifying the society, which they did, they specified that the hapu, which is the people of each village, is sovereign in society. So they actually specified an alternative structure to the system that we're all oppressed by right now. And so that's something that the people of New Zealand, I believe, is a real solution. And in fact, it's a solution for anyone that wants to go with it. So I sort of tested that knowledge out and also unravelled that these privatizations. Firstly, for a government to privatize things that the people need, like essential services, for instance, water, electricity, shelter, whatever those things are, is bad governance, and they don't have the mandate to do it, and nor do they actually own it. So for it to be lawful, what they need is the binding referendum, or a supermajority, 75% of the public, to vote to give them the authority to sell something. So it became really clear in my law studies that the way that this system was progressing was actually unlawful, but because people didn't know the law about this, they were silent. So I went on this quest to see whether in fact these beneficiaries of these privatizations, these retail electricity companies, actually knew that they were trading in stolen goods. So I was sending them lawful notices of a form and stuff, just investigating. And all of the experts in law, like Mary Croft and Robert Menard and the anti-terrorists, there were a few. We're talking about 5 years ago now, that were prominent. Winston Shrout. It was a no-brainer for them that yes, of course these companies would know that they were trading in stolen goods, and they wouldn't come back with a signed bill, because as soon as someone signs a bill, they're accepting liability in case of fraud, which is why all of these privatised industries just send remittance advices or computer-generated things, and they don't sign it. No one actually physically signs these supposed bills that we're meant to pay, because it's all fraudulent. We still actually own those as a member of the public. So I put them in this spot where I said, look, I'm not going to pay this electricity until you actually give me a proper lawful bill, which means someone needs to sign it. And instead of doing that, what they did was they sent two boys in blue. And I actually got a tip off that they were coming, so I put a big sign up on our gates and telling everyone that we've been given water and life freely to share, and the infrastructure that we've built through the public sweat and equity is actually it's all collectively owned by us, and no representative parliament can actually sell it, because they're like the chauffeur of a car. They don't get if you hire a chauffeur to drive your Mercedes around for a year, and he turns around 6 months later and says, hey, I'm just going to stop here at my mate's place and install a meter, and I tell you what, I sold the car last week. Now you're going to have to pay for where I take you. What would you do if you're sitting in the back? You tell the guy to get lost, get out of the car, and you're fired. Yeah. Right? There's actually, the analogy is a perfect fit for what's going on, except that people are sitting there going, sitting in the back seat of their own car going, they sold the car. And then they start to pay the fare, pay the meter, and it becomes a normal concept. So I'd set it up to take it into court, because under a common law system, a jury of 12 members of 12 peers can actually set common law. And so given that over 90% of the people in New Zealand were opposed to the privatisation of the electricity infrastructure, and yet they went ahead and did it anyway, it's a pretty sure bet that you'd get a jury to agree that the government of the day didn't have the mandate to sell it, certainly didn't own the resource. And so that's why they came out with so much force. I mean, they came in, these two guys, and my wife at the time was actually 2 days overdue, and we lived out in the countryside, as I said, so we really needed that electricity. And in fact, when I got tipped off, I actually went and overpaid the bill in cash, because I couldn't afford to, take the risk with our unborn child and my wife. But I just pissed them off. Excuse me. I just gone higher on their radar, so they came in and used quite a bit of brutality and took me away and left my wife with no electricity and tried to keep me in prison for 2.5 years without a trial.
Wow. Now this is when your wife's about to have a baby.
What's that?
Was this while your wife was about to have a baby?
Yeah, I mean, you saw that video, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, she was 2 days overdue, and yeah, I mean, they really endangered her life and the kid's life. I mean, it's I think one of the worst scenes of police brutality that's been televised, that's been caught on camera, that I've seen, and you know, we've had over since we left New Zealand 200,000 hits on that, and it's been blocked by YouTube like 4 or 5 different times. Like there's been a lot of. It's been interesting to see these international organisations or US corporations and stuff working in conjunction with the Crown in New Zealand, you know, and so quickly they're just adjusting to try and keep the lid on this thing. No media coverage or anything.
Hectic. So your wife, were you in prison when she had the baby by any chance?
Yes, I was.
How long were you there for?
Well, I was very lucky, and I know we probably have a different perspective on this, but I actually prayed to the Creator. Like the experience brought me to a point of having faith, and I stopped the court after 2 weeks. You know, this 2-week hearing, and said a prayer in court and asked for everyone's heart to be touched, and like it really changed the tenor of things in there, and I got out. But what they were trying to do was to have me committed as incompetent to stand trial, so that they didn't have to give me a trial, and then they could keep me in prison for 2.5 years. And they drugged. Firstly, I was heavily concussed. I actually had traumatic brain injury because I got hit around the head about 20 times from a baton after I was pepper sprayed. And this is for holding a camera, you know, and wanting to ask questions, just evidencing what they were doing, and so then they put me in front of these psychiatrists. No legal support or due process, all of that stuff, and I'd figured out that what they were trying to do was to frame me as you know, psychiatrically, you know, someone they should put in hospital. So instead of speaking with a psychiatrist, what I did was I wrote a statement and a notice with this law format, sort of apologising if I'd committed anything that could put me into dishonour, and committing to appear, well, for my person to appear as scheduled, because that was the only reason that they should have been able to keep me in jail. Or deny bail. And so what happened was one of the psychiatrists, even though he only spoke with me for 2 minutes, in which time I complained that they were drugging me without my consent and will. They'd put it in my food, in coffees, you know, like my mind was just racing, and I could taste the chemicals at the end of it. You know, it took me about 3 days to figure out that that's what they were doing. And they were trying to get me to sign a consent form to be medically treated, and they almost tricked me into that. But I complained about that because I just said to the nurse, look, I don't have capacity to contract right now. I've got a swelling and heat inside my brain, and I really, you know, I'm shaken up, so don't be pushing any contracts to me right now. And she went and, you know, tried to do this. So they were one psychiatrist short of being able to keep me in hospital, and so they let me out on the proviso that I went and saw this other psychiatrist that they needed to be able to forcibly medicate me and hospitalise me. And by that time, because I got out, I could then see the legislations that they were acting under, and I saw that they were totally breaching their own rules. But I could also wear a wire into the meeting, so I did that. I went to the psychiatrist. I met my son, and actually the first time I met my son was in the courtroom. I could see my wife and son in the back of the court, and you know, 4 days later they'd set up this fixed meeting with this immigrant Indian who's only ever lived in the city. I say Indian because, you know, if you've got someone from an immigrant I'm not being racist here, but if you got an immigrant trying to diagnose the indigenous, or someone from another country as being, fit for society or something else, surely they should actually understand the values of that culture. If it's someone that's only ever lived in an apartment, doesn't have an idea of community or growing vegetables, who is this person that, couldn't survive a week without a supermarket?
Exactly, yeah. Know what you mean. Yeah.
So I went in there, and this 1 hour meeting went for like 2 hours, and he couldn't get anything on me. So what he did was he just misquoted me 32 times, and but he didn't know that I had a recording device in there. Anyway, so I got out of that, and long story short, instead of being someone that was pushing a progressive solution, I became someone that was just having to defend myself for over a year, and so it wasn't that good. And after a year of it, I knew, and all these other law experts and the Indigenous knew that the Crown courts were illegitimate in New Zealand, and I just came to that point of belief and in those facts, and that point of like, I'm not going to play their games anymore. I'm not going to be jumping to their dictates anymore. And I went into court and called them on it, and just called them out and said, look, prove who you are. How did the Crown get here? Where's your writ of commission? How am I to know that this is a court of law? And they couldn't prove it. And so as they escorted me out of the court for my own supposed court case, I dismissed the case, and then we left the country. And here we are in Bolivia.
Goodness. Now, you've been in Bolivia how long?
Over a year now.
Okay. All right. How are you finding it?
Good. It's the cheapest place in Latin America. It has great food. The climate's a little bit dry where we are. It's 8,000 feet up. But the reason that I chose here for our family is because, again, I think the Indigenous really have keys to the society structure that we need to gravitate back towards. And Bolivia has the highest percentage of Indigenous in Latin America, one of the highest in the world, over 60%. As a result, the society is very decentralized, not very heavily corporatized. There's a lot of things liberties that they have here that are just taken for granted. They're part of the everyday life that people in more Western societies like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, South Africa, England, would actually struggle to comprehend. What do you mean you can just make food in your own kitchen and then take it to the street and sell it?
Yeah.
What if people get sick, or what if
Yeah.
Where's your licenses?
Yeah. Yeah. No.
So,
that's interesting, because obviously that would be the first thing I'd ask, why Bolivia? And it's interesting that you've mentioned it that way, because it's funny, as someone who's grown up in a place that's a large population, proportion of the population is native, which is South Africa. I also am someone who believes that the ways we need to move in order to gravitate back to what we're supposed to be is really setting the examples of the old tribal ways. But what I'm finding very difficult is, and particularly in countries like South Africa, when you think of traditional Zulu people, for example, you think of them in these beads and skins dancing and beating drums and whatnot. But these people now are living in poverty. They wear what we wear, like t-shirts and torn jeans and whatnot. They don't even look like they once did in their tribal culture. They don't even properly speak their own languages anymore. And it's kind of so been lost. Is there still a strong tribal essence in New Zealand?
Well, if you believe the statistics, New Zealand, like the census data, only 7% of the population is Māori. It's 7%.
Sure.
And if that was true, and it's possible that it is, only a small subset of that actually understands or know traditional law. and speak the language, and a subset of those actually still live more traditionally, and could continue to do it. But from my perspective, it's more a case of, as long as those ideas and that knowledge is kept alive, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what proportion it is. The thing is, what's that? You can't stop an idea whose time has come. So as long as the knowledge keepers are still there, we still have an out. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, for sure. Now, it's interesting you say 7% are Maori. Now, it's not been terribly long since the British colonised New Zealand. How has that percentage become so low compared to the European population? Have they been actively genocidally wiped out? Or is it just that we've had an influx of European white people?
Every which means, this system is very well resourced because they can print money out of thin air, as your listeners, I'm sure, know.
Yeah.
So, they don't just use one trick, but it is essential for them, for people to lose, to be removed from their land, removed from their village, lose the ways of consensus building, and not to return to their land. I mean, there's a guy who was an English pastor. He was quite well known. Albert Schneider, do you know him? Dr. Albert Schneider?
No, I don't.
He was a big colonialist, and he quoted, "Look, what we have to do is to remove them from the land and prevent them from going back." And that's what I was witnessing with these roadblocks and the unlawful arrests and the bulldozings of the makeshift shelters and stuff. Sure, it didn't meet building code or whatever else, but what the indigenous do is they believe that you don't own the land. We were made from the earth. We're part of it. It's our mother, and our role is to be the kaitiaki, the guardians of it, and so that it can sustain us, and also better for the next generations, to make decisions, at least considering the seventh generation down. And this is what I found. It's the same in all these other indigenous cultures, that they didn't believe in ownership of the land. They believed in, okay, you could have a territory, you could have the right of making laws over that, with these provisos that it had to be made in common. It had to be good for the future generations. So, in answer to your question about has there been genocide, yes, there have been a lot of things. I was, quite frankly, very shocked with Kevin Arnett's expose of what's happening in Canada, and how recent that is with those. What were those schools?
Indian. They're called Indian residential schools.
Indian residential schools,
yes,
yeah.
Church run.
That's absolutely shocking, and great to have that information out there. We had boarding schools that were set up in the 1920s and 30s, and so what they did was they passed all of these laws to get the Māori off their land, and if they couldn't get them off the land, then they would make some fictitious charges up for them, and then set the court date in another part of the country where they weren't, and they'd either get them to go and attend that, and meanwhile take the land, or say if he didn't appear, that we'd take the land, so it's catch-22 kind of stuff. The first, a high percentage of the first attendees of the boarding schools died. Supposedly they all caught a flu in their own homes, and then went to school and died. So yes, we probably had a lot of that. And then there was World War One. So a lot of the Māori that were at that time, they were ostracised from this immigrant society that were being built up in these newly urbanised centres. But because they were being taken off the land, they had to go there, be the cheap labour or whatever else. And so then the kids were getting taken and put into these schools. So it was a step process, and they were sort of discriminated against, right? So they wanted to become good citizens or whatever else, and so they were conscripted, or not conscripted, they volunteered for World War One, for instance. And then what the English when it did, the Crown when it did, was they put an English gentleman in charge of their unit, and they would literally run them into machine guns. It was just every battle, and they'd literally send them into the worst place, and actually with the intent of having them killed. And so while that was going on, they were passing legislation to say, okay, we can just take land that's for the country's good because we're at war. So they were like eminent domain. They were taking the land for these different purposes, and they never gave it back after the war. When the Māori came back, they would find themselves dispossessed. Yet the immigrant settlers, the Pākehās, whether they'd been a couple of generations or not, they came back from fighting the war, and they were given like 1,000 acres to farm on the proviso that they raised it. So you'd take what was native bush, or like beautiful. We've got some of the most fertile soil and very diverse, like some of the most biodiverse bushes, and they give it to these European farmers to burn to the ground, to make pasture land, and that's sort of set the values of a lot of the farming families from there. They started with the match, and they continued largely.
Wow, it's extraordinary. And absolutely heartbreaking, to be honest. What you described is pretty much the kind of the pattern that we see in all sort of former colonial, but rather still colonial, empires. What strikes me as rather interesting is that there is actually some tie between New Zealand's past and South Africa's past. I was wondering if you take us a little bit through the history of New Zealand. Particularly, I'm interested in the exact dates that you first had people settling there, and initially, what was the whole intent of the people who went to New Zealand? Was it to establish a port, or what was that all about? Or was it, it was also just part of the takeover like Australia was?
Yeah, well, it was a little bit after Australia. I think New Zealand was the last to be discovered, if you want to say that. At the time they had, as I said, they'd even built their own trading ships. But as a result, we had this stronger memory of these tribal ways. So 1840, in the lead up to that, it was for trading. The immigrants went there largely for trading. Okay. And there was an increasing amount of ships coming and going for those purposes. Now, and as I said, in 1835 was the Declaration of Independence, right. That was recognised. 2 years prior to that, or 1834, was the official recognition of the trading flag. So we even had our own trading flag, which was internationally recognised, and that came about because in 1932, one of the trading ships, the Māori trading ships, was confiscated in Papua New Guinea, I believe, or in the East Indies, and they said that because they were flying their own flag of flax, which is what they made their flag out of, and it wasn't internationally recognised, that it was a pirate ship. It was just to stop them from trading, and so they confiscated the boat, they stole all the goods, and they just ditched the crew. So a couple of Māori chiefs travelled to England, and they actually gate crashed one of King William IV's parties in Buckingham Palace, and absolutely shamed him. And out of that shaming, he committed to recognising a flag for their sovereign nation. And the significance of the Declaration of Independence in conjunction with this flag is that whether you go by the law of the land, which you need to have a sovereign nation recognised, or the law of the water, admiralty law, which the system is built on, and you need your own flag, which is recognised, either way, the people were sovereign. So it's a bit of a problem for them. And Australia was earlier to get colonised. It was a convict colony. They would basically say, look, if you don't go to these foreign lands, you're going to just rot in a prison. So they're sending all these immigrants there and promoting these criminal mindsets into the parliament in Australia, and those were the ones from New South Wales that were asserting control, trying to dominate in New Zealand. But even within that, you had the admirals of these ships and these fleets, like the East India Trading Company, like affiliated with the East India Trading Company and the like, doing their thing. And you had the House of Commons and House of Lords in England. They were actually saying, look, okay, we're sort of over this these brutal colonising tactics, and let's just respect the indigenous people. So they were actually forbidding the admirals from continuing this imperialistic colonisation, and I believe they split. They actually went, and there's evidence, documented evidence to see the monarchists were saying one thing, and the House of Lords were saying, look, you have to treat the indigenous as sovereign and respect their lands and their laws. And you had the admiral say, well, stuff you, we're gonna make a fraudulent treaty, and we're gonna just sell it all. So they conspired to do this Treaty of Waitangi in 1840, but in 1839, they're already selling lottery tickets for immigrants to New Zealand.
Wow.
They already had people on the boat before they actually had the legal right to immigrate people, or have immigrants in New Zealand.
Wow. Okay. All right. So now, again, over the years, I'm still amazed that still only 7% of the population of New Zealand is Maori. That I find absolutely fascinating, considering that, as I said, you've not been colonised for terribly long, no more than say 160, 170 years. And that means that there's probably been some real detribalization that's been going on there, or as you said, influx of immigrants. And I just don't see that there's been that many people going there that would completely outweigh an entire sort of native population that's got thousands of years on the land. I mean, how do you know how far back the Maori tribes can be traced in New Zealand? Have you got any kind of archaeological idea?
Like 600 years or so. They try and say only 400, but no, it goes back a long way. And the history of all these nations is it's really interesting, and it's hard to know. I mean, there's some people speculating that it's actually Atlantis, and there's some maps that support that. But,
wow. Well, hang on a second. So where did they must have come over from sort of Polynesia or Australia to New Zealand, is what you're saying? About 600 years ago, there was nobody living there?
No, I wouldn't even commit to that. I would not even commit to that. I mean, it's what I would commit to is it's a lot longer than the official story, and the history is very different to the official story. So,
of course.
And yes, they have got this influx of immigrants. I mean, I looked at the population statistics and the forecast population 10 years ago, and they had this trend line going up, and we should be at about 4 million right now, based on their own forecast. And now we're at 4.4 million, and there's I can't see somewhere it's just jumped up. It isn't through birth rate or anything else. But at the same time, what they do is they discriminate against the indigenous, so they don't. And a lot of people would deny this. But it's not even the indigenous, in fact. They discriminate against New Zealanders. They're hiring people from overseas and giving them residency before they've even got there, oftentimes, and allowing them to vote in the so-called sovereign and free and democratic elections. Yet at the same time, the New Zealanders have got to go overseas to find good work. So there are organisations that are tracking this, like the OECD, Oceanic Economic Development Group. It was another Rockefeller initiative, spawned initiative, and that's tracking all of these OECD nations for immigration and immigration. And what we see is New Zealand has worst record for retaining our skilled population, and the second worst overall at retaining our population. And for every skilled worker that we lose, we actually bring in more immigrants. So there's this big population swap going on globally, and the reason again is, if you can mix it up so that people don't know how to talk to each other, and they come from so many diverse cultures they just they need to buy their food from the supermarket. They don't trust that they could actually sit down with their neighbour and make a decision without a state intermediary. Then they can proceed with their system. So there's the great population swap going on. There's a lot of, supposedly close to 1 million. There's a lot of Māori in Australia, and internationally. There's over 7 million New Zealand passports issued, yet we have a population of 4.4 million.
Now, the population concept that you've mentioned is very interesting, and I'll tell you why. Because even as a South African, this is getting noticed. There's a huge, almost 40% in some parts of South Africa unemployment, and yet a very good friend of mine who is South African was recently over in the Far East, and he caught a plane back from China to South Africa, and he said they were literally bussing in Chinese unskilled workers, and they were so unskilled and so sort of de-westernized that on the plane they were actually licking the little single-serving butters, not knowing what to do with them. Obviously, they don't use a lot of butter in China. That is how how unskilled and how uneducated and how unwesternized that these people were, being brought in clearly for unskilled jobs, and there are millions of unskilled workers already unemployed in South Africa, and I have to wonder if this whole moving people around from country to country isn't an attempt to break down cultural barriers, to make us less patriotic and make us more willing to just sort of hand over to a central power, because we no longer have a claim to the land, because we're not necessarily on the land that we're born on.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Okay. It's to remove that the sense of guardianship and responsibility, that you're a visitor in that land. So who am I to stand against the government there? And also I experienced it. I'm sure I know from your story you're experiencing too. These immigrants become like the staunchest locals, if you want to say it. Oh, you can't do that. That's against the law. Yet the tax evaders at the same time. Well, don't ask questions. Don't challenge authority. And you become like this outcast in your own land through these people that have they come in as an immigrant, and they're made to swear an oath to this illegitimate parliament that's imposing a totalitarian system.
Yeah. I experienced something similar when I did the whole 2-year working holiday visa from South Africa, and I went over to London. And we think, it was such a big deal to get this. We feel so grateful just to be able to have the privilege to go over and work there. And you don't actually realize that we come over and we do all this like real slave labor, like a lot of people go picking melons in fields and all sorts. But not only that, we're not allowed to claim any benefits whatsoever whilst we're on this working visa. So if anything happens to us, it's totally sort of our own bag, even though the rest of the population is covered. So you really are a slave labor that's not a burden on the society at all. You come over and you give your labor and you pay tax. And and this is they sell it to you like it's such a privilege that you're able to do this, and it was such a big deal to get the visas, the things I had to go through, the interviews. It was, oh my word, what a process. And you have this idea when you come over that it's just supposed to be so amazing, and it was. My experience was, but looking back now, I see it glaringly obvious for what it is. It's the import of ignorant labor.
Yeah, and it's interesting you touch on that, because that's one of the points of this so-called Treaty of Waitangi, that the Māori would have all the rights of a British subject. Yeah, they can't just go and live in England and work in England and receive the benefits of England. So, and it reminds me of that island Diego Garcia. I'm sure you're familiar with their story.
Yeah.
They were actually English passport holders, and they just got picked up and dumped in a neighbouring island, told their island was sold, and if they complained about it, they'd end up at the bottom of the ocean. were gassed like their dogs the month before. So, yeah, we really have to overcome this racial divide that's being foisted on us, and it's like, and for me, we've got to look at these. What are the principles for good living, and keep things simple, and then start to adopt those where we live. Like instead of, I see a lot of people pointing the finger and identifying the problems of this society and the illegitimacy of the construct. But if we don't also raise consciousness about the solutions at the same time, they're just going to do the same problem, reaction, solution thing again on us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I tell you what, I'm so glad you're back, because I was so into what you were saying in part one. Very, very interesting to get the Kiwi perspective, really. It boggles my mind that the pattern is so prolific in all the past colonial empires. You were saying before we got started, before we went off to the break, that it's about sort of going back to tribal ways. Now, I want to pose a question to you, and to me this seems to be the ultimate paradox of our time, and that is, how do you educate people to maintain their culture so that they can pass on their cultural heritage to their children, whilst moving into a society that's becoming more of a global village? For example, where you don't see many native people running around in loincloths and skins and beads. They all wear jeans and t-shirts now. They all bloody use the internet and have cell phones. We are moving towards a global society. How do we maintain that with this sort of move in technology that we're kind of facing? I mean, is there any easy answers to this?
Well, there's a lot of ways to address that question, and it's a very good question. There was a picture I saw on Facebook last week, and it was of this Native American Indian, and apparently he was like the third generation after they'd been sort of colonized, and he was. The question was asked of him from a white immigrant. Where did we go wrong? And he said, well, in our way, the woman did all the work. We went out and hunted and fished all day, and he said it was a perfect system. Why change it? And really, okay, it was nice to have a computer and a cell phone and be able to work and communicate, that kind of stuff. But really, that's just there because we don't have the connections locally. We need to earn money so that we can go fishing and hunting and do the things we like to do, Whereas if we didn't need the money to do that, if we could just live like that, maybe we wouldn't use the laptops and the cell phones. Maybe we'd choose not to. And the flip side to answering that is that I think that we're a bit, I wouldn't say I'd say some people are a bit naive to think that the indigenous societies would not have come up with the laptop themselves also, or the cell phone if they wanted it. Do you know what I mean?
I love it.
In fact, we'd be a bit misinformed to actually think that those inventions came along without any input from any indigenous peoples, because we all came from villages anyway. Yeah, well, people that have been exposed to too many toxins, whether it's through sprays or insecticide, or through paints, just too much exposure to this manufactured stuff, actually have to go back to adobe buildings, natural products, organic, So, and when you look at the declining life expectancy and also the declining health of people that are alive, like the increase in diseases and the like, food sensitivities, I think it's a good idea for us to actually go back to more using more natural things, natural and sustainable things anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that seems to be just the most logical thing anyway. Just when you look at nature and the way it works, it doesn't survive with endless amounts of wardrobe and chemicals that we put into. They don't need face creams and toothpaste, so nature works very well without it. We've become just a very strange society that we have. I mean, just the average person, the amount of products, and I'm just talking about personal care products that the average person uses. I'm not talking about nature people, I'm talking about westernized people. And I know, because I used to work for L'Oreal some time back, and I just look at, the statistics we used to get, the market demographics about how much the average woman spends on daily polluting her body with toxins from all the stuff they put on that they think is actually making them better, but, damaging their health in the meantime.
Yeah. I mean, and what 80% of those products typically contain paraben,
yes.
which affects the thyroid function. And look at the skyrocketing numbers of women with thyroid problems and requiring medicine for their whole life because it can't be cured, supposedly. It's all hand in hand. I don't think actually it's that much of a reach to educate people and actually have them choose more of a natural path and sustainable path. Like in concept, people can see the common sense in it, but things like anti-labeling laws, like the systems trying to prevent people from making informed choices. Like they don't want genetically modified foods to be identified. Which it sort of shows that actually the majority of people, and I would actually say it's like about 2/3 of people, have still got some common sense. That they would actually do the right thing or buy sensibly, all that kind of stuff, if they were given the right information.
Yeah,
but it's being hidden from them, or they're being miseducated.
I agree. I'm very optimistic about the outlook for humanity if humanity is presented with the right information. People say that we're doomed. I'm saying no. I just think we need to make more of an effort to get the information to the people. I really think that it's the simplest things we have to make people aware of, and food is a good place to start. And you now living obviously in Bolivia. Are you growing your own fruit and veggies and stuff?
Yeah, we have a greenhouse, and the land here literally has to be broken in. It has more rock than soil, and I've already broken one tool, just last week. But that said, we're surrounded by small lot farmers, people that actually sustain their families from working the land. And when I say small lot, I'm probably talking like a couple of acres, 3 or 4 acres, diverse crops. And they've broken the land in, and once it's there, the irrigation systems they have is like the water comes down from the mountain, and there are like these irrigation trenches that go all over, and it's like there's a system where it gets meted out, and it irrigates these fields. They get like 5 hours a week or something like that, and it just saturates, because it doesn't rain here for like 9 months of the year, but yet they're growing all this food. So I love to be surrounded by a community that's in touch with the land, that knows how to grow food, that's doing it, and you can stop by and buy a bag of lettuce for like 30 cents if you want from the neighbour, eggs from the other neighbour, like this is just part of the culture. So yes, and we're on this lot that's also got an alternative school on it, and just this morning we were doing work with the school to prepare some of their land. So yeah, got to work to educate people at the same time as be the change, right, that you see.
Yeah. Well, no, it's very interesting. I mean, I have so much respect for what you've done, because what you're telling me, you've travelled a lot. Obviously, you lived in the States, California, and what amazes me is how you say, having worked with a medical company and now having come full swing to where you are. is absolutely the direction people should be heading. And so well done to you, and interesting to hear from someone because there are a lot of people currently heading for places like Ecuador and Bolivia for the reasons that you've mentioned. Ecuador because of the extradition treaties and being non-existent, of course. There is a lot of movement in that direction because people are now wanting to move out of the cities and onto their own land. They're waking up, particularly the smarter ones. I know Bill Ryan from Project Camelot sort of done very much the same thing, gone down to South America. And this seems to be the general trend of the awake and aware folk. Is it an easier life than when you were working in the corporate world?
There's definitely trade-offs. I mean, I can't just... when I was in England, I was earning, after my first year, I was earning more than the New Zealand Prime Minister.
Sure.
I could jet set around, I could go anywhere I wanted in Europe in a weekend. And so, no, my lifestyle's changed, but it's rich. And you have to really redefine what wealth is,
Yes.
Wealth for me is how much time I have with my family, eating good food, not being exposed to toxins, drinking clean water. That's wealth for me. So the adjustment, until your values change, if it's still money and jet setting and materialistic, then it's going to be a very hard change for people. But if it's health, family, future generations, then it's a very natural progression. Part of the reason that you mentioned Ecuador and obviously Bolivia, and I spent 3 months in Venezuela before I came here just to check that out, because there's this notion that's put out there that socialism is an alternative. You've got these like Chavez and Castro and the guy who's Evo Morales here, and the guy in Ecuador. That maybe they're putting out something different that we could gravitate towards, these Western societies could gravitate towards as a solution. And so I wanted to do my due diligence on them also and actually see, does the political format, these elections, actually offer hope for the change that needs to come? And the answer is no. Chavez, he talks. What I do like about him is that he does talk about empowering the people power, decisions being made locally, and because he talks about it so much, it actually is part of the mindset of the people now, and some of that's sticking to the wall. Some decisions are actually happening locally. But if you look at a macro level, what he's doing to the nation, he's making it food dependent for the first time. It used to be a food exporter. Now it's importing some foods. He's taking Venezuelans off the land and giving the land rights to Russian corporations, Chinese corporations. He's running up the debt and
same
he's
old
doing the
thing.
same stuff.
Yeah,
same stuff, and the same here in Bolivia, and if you want to say people. I'm sorry to shatter their illusion, if they think Ecuador is going to be a safe place for them. I'll drop a name, Greg Caton, the guy who took black salve from the indigenous and put it out on the world stage through his website and different stuff. And he had to flee the US and was living in Ecuador, and the FDA just paid off some cops there and SWAT teamed him in Ecuador, put him on a plane, even though an Ecuadorian judge said it was illegal, took him to the US and held him in prison for 2 years. So there's no running from this totalitarian system. We need solutions. We need to support solutions and be the change where we are now. So I know a lot of people, especially people like yourself and myself, have had to move for our own safety and so that we can focus on family and continue what we're doing. But that doesn't stop us or preclude us from being a member of our local community. The imperative is still there.
Yeah, absolutely, and our heart is still there because, I guess there, you get to a point on this journey, and I have certainly looked back, and a lot of the times when I was in odd situations, I've said to myself, why is this happening? Or a good example is I say, why was I, for example, born in South Africa? As a white person, I went through the post-apartheid era where it became almost impossible for a white person to get a decent job, and we had to go off to London to look for work. So, going through that whole sort of epic bit, and looking back now, and I realise, much like yourself, that there is a necessary experience that was required for us to obtain in order for us to look back with some kind of solution in place, knowing first off what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And then we have to. I think we have like a good amount of clues as to what is needed. Like community is the words that form that common unity. Okay, so common unity. Well, that means we need to build local consensus.
Yeah.
We need to have made agreements. So let's work to make some agreements now. And what I found in New Zealand, because I was trying to do this while I was also defending myself, was that there are a lot of colonised, brainwashed, whatever you want to call it, minds that will oppose common unity. We can't make a decision on that. So in going towards those solutions, we're going to find new problems, and so we got to just overcome each of those problems as they come along.
Okay. Well, Simon, let's talk about this then. You obviously have thought about this long and hard. You're a very intelligent man. You've had a good earning potential at some points in your life. You've travelled a lot. You must have a kind of idea, apart from community. Give us some of your basic ideas of what you think is going to work and make us move forward.
Okay, well, the last depression gives us a clue as to what needs to happen in response to this economic maldistribution of wealth, right? We need to implement a local community currency where we are. And the sooner you get that in place, the sooner your wealth distribution is going to improve, the sooner people around you are going to be motivated to produce the things, the goods and services that they can, which is going to take the pressure off your essentials because you're going to have food, a wealth of food locally, all that kind of stuff, and reduce crime because you've got this stronger relationships and better wealth distribution. Crime is something that comes out of poverty, basically. So that's like high on the list, an alternative currency. And you can go a simple book-based one, which you just have a central ledger somewhere located centrally in your community that keeps everyone's total of the transactions. So that for balance records, and everyone has a little trade book that they countersign with someone else's trade book, so you can negotiate the price of a certain good and just one up, one down. That would be number one. Number two is start growing your own food and seed swapping. Some people don't have the land or the time to do that. Okay, fine. You're buying and you're eating food. Pool your money and go to a local farmer and say, look, I know you're just doing this crop over here, maybe cows or whatever else, but you've got a tractor and you've got good land. Can we do a community garden here or a food co-op where we will pay you a fixed amount per month, $200 or whatever you'd spend normally on veggies, and we come and pick up a weekly basket of food. That's a great way. Also, get it done today. It's not so hard. You're really spending that money growing that food. The other one is to look at. It only takes a leader or a couple of people within the community to lead an initiative through to a positive outcome. So look at whatever the local issue is right now, the pressing issue. For instance, if your community is about to be exploited through fracking, this gas extraction, which is going to poison the table water. Okay, everyone's got to be concerned about that. Everyone except for foreign corporations or someone that wants to just make money off that, which would be a small percentage of people. Call the people together, whether it's in a house or the local community, put some flyers out, educate everyone, and go through the process of making a direct democratic decision. Because that's what we call it in modern society, but guess what? That's how the indigenous used to do it too. Allow every different viewpoint to be heard, have someone who's skilled at organising the meeting and making sure that no one's repeating themselves or yelling, to go through and come out with a decision, and then instead of submitting it to the so-called authorities, you notify them, So get people used to the inherent power that they have. That one's, for me, it's absolutely essential. And in the process of that, you're going to educate people about these things, and also, as I said, see which people are saying one thing and doing another.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, as you say, the food thing's important. I think that for me is the most important key for people to understand, is becoming self-sufficient food-wise. And that's, I think, the most power we have at the moment is even if we have, and I've discussed this many times on my shows, even if you have like a little patio, you can grow a little tier of something. There's so many different options and ways of going about this, and so many different things that you can find and research on the internet. We've this year, for the first time, we've started growing our own fruit and vegetables, and let me tell you something, it was such a rewarding experience. And I know this sounds weird for someone coming from South Africa, but I grew up very, very spoilt. I never grew my own food. Closest I ever came to growing anything is growing my own weed when I lived at university. But that's about it. And suddenly, for the first time, we're growing our own food and learning the whole bonding with nature, working with the earth, understanding the seasons, what works when. And I've been watching a little bit of Jamie Oliver at home as well. And one thing I must say I enjoy about his programs is how he teaches people what works when and how to plant certain things. And he does it all organically. And I think this knowledge has been so lost. And it totally amazes me that we've never been taught this sort of thing in school.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it doesn't matter. You might have a window, a roof, only concrete. You can still grow food. And if you look at the trade restrictions that were slapped on Cuba and embargoes and the difficulties they had with oil as a result of that, because they don't produce enough of their own oil, they switched to growing food. And 50% of Havana's food was grown within the city, on rooftops, in balconies, 50% from within a city.
Sure. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think is going? I have to ask you now. You see the Pope going down, visiting Castro, and coming around to all those sort of very Catholic South American countries. It's a real dichotomy down there. They all seem to be very much already, despite whatever freedom there may apparently be, it's quite illusory. They all still seem to be very much controlled by the same powers that control the rest of the world, being the Vatican.
Yes, I would agree with that totally. And I considered doing political exile here in Bolivia, and I believe I actually warrant that. So I went and had a couple of meetings, and it was interesting to see who actually decided for the supposed free and democratic state of Bolivia, who should be granted this political exile or not. It was the church.
Really? That's interesting.
So as soon as I found that out, I was just like, forget about it. Yeah.
Wow.
And you mentioned before, you asked this question about what the connection is with South Africa and New Zealand. If I could, I'd like to.
Yes. Oh, I'd love to do that. Yes.
In a little bit of a more modern context. There was a lot of this system it's only held in check through the consciousness, the free will, and the deeds of people. So what's accepted is as far as they can go. That's why disinformation, miseducation is such a strong emphasis for them. But there was a big change in the 80s in the structure of the system, and it went to fully corporate. It was that speech that David Rockefeller gave to the CFR that's been leaked on the on YouTube. It was saying, look, thanks to the media, the global media, the Times, and whatever else for keeping the lid on this.
Yeah.
New World Order thing, while we rolled it out, kind of stuff. We could never have done it without them. And it actually was rolled out in the 80s. And so, as you mentioned, in our first conversation, you found the corporate entity that's posing as the free and democratic state of South Africa.
Yeah.
And there's one that's posing as USA, and there's another that's posing as New Zealand. That one's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And since myself and a lot of other people have been exposing that corporation, which is called Her Majesty the Queen and Right of New Zealand, they're actually closing that one down, and they're going to close it. They'll open another one. But it's this corporate hierarchy. So this New World Order is all these corporate subsidiaries that you roll them up, and they go through the City of London. They go through the Bank of International Settlements. That deals with all the central banks, or takes 2/3 of the central bank's profits, and yes, it does seems to end up at the Vatican. So that's this New World Order that we're living under, is this corporate thing, and that's what we have in common. Along with, they've also worked out that what they need to do to keep people happy is give them incremental wins along the way, especially with the indigenous. But it's not just against the indigenous; it's against all people. So they give, maybe a Bill of Rights, or maybe they give treaties, negotiations, or settlements, or give them a little bit here, a little bit there. Or, like in the case of South Africa, give them a black leader,
Yeah, he's a Knight of Malta.
Yeah, exactly.
Papal puppet.
Mandela, former activist.
Yeah, former terrorist responsible for murdering hundreds of thousands of people. But now he's a national hero, leader of a country. Never mind, he's a Knight of Malta and papal puppet.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop the miners from getting killed when they protest the electricity being cut off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Now, I know what you mean by incremental wins, because this goes back to the whole sort of, give them the independence. Like South Africa supposedly became independent in 1961 and became the Republic of South Africa, and we had our own currency, and we no longer recognize the Queen as the sovereign head. But, with all due respect, nothing really changed. The money is still going to the Oppenheimers, who owns 80% of the South African economy. And I'm sure it's pretty much the same for any other country that declared illusory independence. But what is interesting to notice is places like Canada, New Zealand and Australia still recognise the Queen as their sovereign head.
Well, supposedly, but the Queen really doesn't respond to letters other than to say you've got to talk to your Governor General, who is actually a general. We have just like any of these other regimes, like the former Chilean, Argentine, these constitutional monarchies, it's not the Prime Minister, the elected Prime Minister, so-called elected Prime Minister, that's the head of state. It's the Governor General, and he's a military man, and he's overseen the genocide of Palestinians, the East Timorese, with the UN. Now he's the head of our state, unelected. So, we've got to shatter this illusion that we live in free and democratic times, because right now they don't have all of the pieces in place, but they require people to do their bidding and to just shut up and do their job, So,
Simon, tell me, do you have elections in New Zealand?
Crown elections.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's all a big show, but do they still play the show there, even though you supposedly the Queen is still head of state? Who are you voting for? The Queen representative number 1, Queen representative number 2.
Yeah, they have elections. It's the same as you probably have, the two-party system, red and blue.
Yeah.
Call them something else. Use different words. Keep people confused internationally. National Labour, but it's actually red and blue, same as France, same as the US. And the media's, we were the first to privatise our media, so we've got so few media outlets, and they're all totally controlled. In fact, they're owned by Reuters, which acquired Brookers, and Brookers is this US company which is writing the New Zealand legislation.
Wow.
and they own the newspapers and the TV. So,
oh wow. It's a bit of a mess.
So they can manipulate whatever they want, and they worked out that what they needed to do was to allow immigrants to vote, to keep the voting numbers up and to get the result they wanted. So they did. So you could be a resident, someone that's just been born somewhere else and gone to New Zealand, given a job, and after 1 year of being in New Zealand, you can vote like a full citizen, and they won't report on how many how many foreigners are voting in our elections. Because I'll tell you what, the Māori aren't voting, they're not so much. The people that are aware, not so much. And we've got these local elections that the majority are not voting now. And for me, the first thing is, you've got to vote for representation. So you've got to register and vote to be represented. And if you don't vote to be represented, then you've got the responsibility to make direct, what's called popular democratic decisions. So you've got to actually make decisions locally, and the majority are doing that unwittingly right now. They don't know that by default they now have the power, that these so-called governing bodies or representative bodies don't have the mandate, so they can make the decisions, and I feel confident arguing that in any court of law. Yeah. Not that we get access to those anymore.
Wow. Simon, it's quite a journey you've been on, and you know what? I think listening to you actually makes me feel very happy, because you really, really know what you're talking about, and it makes me feel optimistic about our future, because I think there are definitely people out there who have the ability to take us forward, and you certainly are one of them, and I think it's a real loss to New Zealand that you're not there.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's sad not to be there right now, but at the same time, I've released that information. I've shared what I know. I continue on my journey, and there are a lot of other people that are pushing too. So when the time's right, I'd love to be able to go back to New Zealand and live in peace, but that's just not today.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I dream of going home to South Africa every day, and it's been 13 years now. So it's still my aim one day, but unfortunately I just don't see my children being able to inherit a fair, peaceful, sustainable society there, unless everybody else there also has that same expectation, and that comes from trying to make a difference on a much bigger level.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because there's another optimistic fact. There was this Zimmerman et al. Psychiatric study. It's been bandied around quite a bit. You remember that he was a professor in the university, and he got his students to role play a game show, and he hooked one guy up to an electric chair and had the other one in the control room. Do you know that one?
No, tell us.
Okay, yeah, and so supposedly they were both randomly picked from, but the one that was in the chair was an actor. And he got the student to be the game show host, and would ask questions, and when the person in the chair got them wrong, he'd have to give them a little zap. And every time he got one wrong, he'd also had to turn it up a little bit. Anyway, because of the fact that these students had volunteered for this game show role play, for the study, and he was standing over their shoulders saying, you got to do it, he basically got them to go right beyond, actually endanger the person's life, where they're screaming and pain and all this kind of stuff, where they could have killed the person. And most of them went through with it, even though they protested and whatever else, because they were in that subservient position. Supposedly they'd made the decision, and they were underneath his guidance. They continued to press the buzzer. That's been cited in a lot of movies and whatever else, and it's not so good, and that's actually what's happening in society. But the second part of the study isn't told so much, and it's this Zimmerman guy got two actors, and everyone else that was going next was witnessed this utterance, and one actor in the chair, one in the game show thing. Anyway, when the guy in the chair started complaining of pain, and I quit, I don't want to do it. The guy who was playing the game show host protested and stood up and said, look, I'm not going to do any more, I'm hurting him. And they had this mass argument, and anyway, he stormed off. What happened next was that 90% of the people that had witnessed that person do the right thing, when it came their turn, they also stopped. They also didn't proceed either. They did the right thing. So the point is, it doesn't matter how much of a minority you are in terms of right thinking and wanting to stand by morals, look after the future generations, all these things, these situations that you find that we can do things even if they're going to come at personal cost. When we do them, 90% of the witnesses to that will do the right thing when it comes their time, in the same thing. And then 90% of the witnesses to those witnesses will do the right thing too. So it's just going to snowball this this turnaround, which is why they have to be so hard. This is why they're so hard on stomping on people and trying to make the apparent cost of doing the right thing seem so high. But it shouldn't stop us from doing it, because doing it is the solution.
Absolutely.
So what we have now is this construct of limited liability. You just got to do your job. You're told your orders, and this corporate shield prevents you from having personal responsibility. Or if a crime's committed, the state has to get in there and punish the other person. You don't get restored. What the Indigenous, and also in this society, that people get given these positions where they have authority and decision-making capabilities, so their ego and their self-interest really propels them into taking on these corporate traits that the whole system's designed to function by. So the way that the Indigenous cultures mitigated ego was that instead of having titles like these, manager and whatever else, they had positions. So every village would have to have a chief, for instance. They'd have to have an ahika, someone that kept the fires burning. They'd have to have kaifakahairos, people that went out and talked, visited other villages and that kind of stuff. But they didn't assign it to one person. What they did was they created the position. They described the limits and the function of that position, and then the best person for that position was assigned into it. And if someone better came along, or if that person was sick or away travelling or whatever else, the next best person would go into it. So no one no one was just discarded. There was people would always have a position to fill, and sometimes it was like this constantly rotating thing based on your skill set, keeping all of the functions that needed to happen filled. And so you mitigate the ego. That way, as I said, I really like that system, and it what we see now is like those who have higher tendencies for psychosis, that are psychotic,
yeah,
they're not, don't have empathy, compassion, they're promoted. They do better in this system. Whereas in the other system, what you do is, there are always those people that had those. There are always people that had those traits. You'd put them in the garden. You'd put them in these positions that they wouldn't be able to cause harm. The other thing is, the other aspect is like justice. How did justice get? How did crime get prevented? And it was that instead of material wealth being the highest aspiration, it was actually your mana, your honour, your influence. It's not necessarily honour's not the perfect fit, and that was built up by deed and how you spoke and how knowledgeable you were, and it related to the subject also. So that was the highest currency. And if you were someone that would say stupid things or make stupid decisions, your mana and your influence would go down. Which is a natural way again of limiting harm. And when someone actually did cause harm to someone else, they would, if it was just a family matter, it would get resolved between the families. And first, if that individual could make the restoration, then it would come off what they had, or services that they could provide. And if they couldn't or didn't, then it would come off their family. Or if it was between two villages, then it would be the village of the person that caused the harm would restore the other village. So you've got these increasing levels of ways to keep peace. And it's a fallacy that these indigenous societies were just barbaric and when you look at these systems these protocols and principles that they had, where it was where it did use what we'd say is violence is, let's say two individuals just couldn't work it out, and they needed to live within the same hapu, then you might let them sort it out. Or if it's between two villages and they both dig their feet in and say, look, I'm not going to restore you, I don't think it's right, then they might say, well, okay, let's settle it, you're the three best warriors against our three best warriors, But it wasn't this whole big, killing each other. In fact, I find the modern system much more brutal and unsophisticated.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever thought about writing a book?
Yeah, I have, and I mentioned to you what I want to do is I want to make a game out of it.
Okay.
I do a board game.
Yeah, a good idea, because that's good for programming people.
Yeah, exactly. Realigning their thought processes and their knowledge. We see Monopoly, Settlers of Catan, the Game of Life. These big board games that are like most of the kids grow up with, but we actually look at what it's teaching them.
Yes.
Monopoly is monopolization, commercialization, exploitation. Certainly not about equality, justice, everyone getting what they need. The same with Settlers of Catan, where you take a blank. I don't know if you know the game. Do you know that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to love the game, but then for about a year, and then I sort of understood more of the other way. I was running with the Māori in New Zealand, and I was like, that's what this game's doing. You take an unspoiled land that's resource rich, with this naturally diverse, and you make resources out of it. You take them and you block your competitors and you have developed.
Well, look at all the games that are out there. Things like Cluedo, it's about murder, and then of course there's the other one, Risk, which is about world domination. You think about what these games are really all about. Then of course there's chess, which is you think of that's such a metaphor for life. It's I think a game's a brilliant idea, and I wish you all the best success for it. But for me, it just seems that your knowledge about tribal ways and stuff is is so valuable. You've got such a resource, and such a broad perspective. I think a book is something that would be a great contribution from you at some point to the knowledge base out there. There's so clearly a lot that you want to communicate, and a lot of ideas that you have, which I think a lot of people need to be made aware of.
Well, thanks for that. And I keep hearing and this cliche, and it's that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. Really, I am. I'm just a little dwarf standing on the shoulders of giants. There are so many other people that know it so much more and deeper than me. It's just I have an ability to connect the dots, and I've been asking the question for quite a few years now. Not a lot for your journey, but 7 or 8 years. How can we solve this situation? And so, I think a game is better suited to me. There are people that know it much better than myself that could write a book.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I agree completely, and I say it to myself, it's a terrible cliche, the whole standing on the shoulders of giants, because for having written a book and coming to know what I've known, it's all... Yes, a lot of it has been my own research, and a lot of it has been my own experience, which has helped me wake up and then go down these paths of research. But there are so many, of course, many more people out there who have that much more knowledge. But I think to come at it from a point of view where it's not just about you talking the talk, you actually have experience, like yourself. That horrific video of you being beaten. I mean, when I watched that, I was like, okay, I need to speak to this guy. you've really been in the thick of it and moved around trying to create a better sort of environment for your family. And I tell you what, a lot of respect to you for doing that.
Thanks, Mel.
Yeah. All right. Listen, Sam, we are reaching the last few minutes of the show. I just wanted to ask you if there's anything else you wanted to add. One last message for humanity, perhaps?
There was a guy, Ulrich Bezmenov, who was a KGB defector. Have you seen his stuff on YouTube?
No, tell me. You're teaching us a lot of new stuff here tonight.
New old. I think it was in the 80s. His interviews were recorded, but they're on YouTube. Ulrich Bezmenov, quite interesting in terms of revealing how this society is being engineered. And what he says is, look, the KGB is not about running around as 007s and knocking people off. That's a small part of it, but the majority of it was to pervert the social values. We go into a nation and we try and change the values to what we wanted. It was communist stuff, and we realised that it would take us typically 18 years, because you've got to indoctrinate a generation, right through their schooling. And so that's what has been happening. And he lays out the stages. First you've got to demoralise them, then you've got to cause a disaster. He actually lays out the 4 steps to coming out with this new world order. That's the same thing that they're going to have to do for that. And the step that we're in right now, the 3rd step, what he was saying is the only thing that we can do to go back to a moral society and prevent the next step, which is the disaster and then rolling out the solution, is a return to morality. And we can't return or expect society to return to morality if we are demoralised. A lot of people are down on other people, the masses, the sheep, whatever else, and they're demoralised. It prevents them from doing the right thing, from standing strong, from being the example. So it doesn't really matter what you call God or what you have. This is the message I'd like to leave your listeners with. What you have faith in beyond yourself. As long as you have a faith beyond yourself, beyond your own mere mortal existence, that will give you the strength to stand on your morals, which is what we all need to do to have a happy outcome.
Absolutely. Wow, Simon, can I just say a very big thank you. Your interview tonight has been just so wonderful and refreshing, and you know what, lots of great new information in there, not the same old stuff we've been hearing, and great to get it from the Kiwi perspective. I'd really love to chat to you again sometime soon, perhaps a little bit off the record, to share some information, but thank you ever so much for gracing us with your presence here on Finding Voices Radio. And I just want to say on behalf of all the listeners to Freedom Central, a very big thank you, and we wish you all the best.
Thanks a bunch for what you do. I really appreciate you taking all the time to get people out there and through your own personal quest.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We're on the same mission, mate, and ultimately, I think we understand the absolute necessity in trying to create a better world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Speak to you soon, Simon. Take care. Bye-bye.